God, teach us this day as we wait for the arrival of your Son once again, what it means to walk in your light, to live in your light, to sing and breathe and work and play and serve in your light. And may the words of my mouth this day, the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, our Lord, our rock, our Redeemer, our friend. Amen. Climbing mountains is not easy. If you've ever spent any time hiking or backpacking, you know what it takes to get to the top of a mountain. When you're carrying a heavy backpack, often struggling to put one foot in front of the other, in the thin mountain air, flirting with altitude sickness, drenched in sweat and covered in dirt, sometimes not showering for days, eating bad food, sleeping in cold and uncomfortable conditions. The question of why you decided to do this in the first place can very easily creep into your mind and linger there as every step brings new pain. And it's for those same reasons that most people perhaps don't go climbing mountains in the first place. And yet, despite all the difficulties and the strain of the journey, if you've ever experienced that, once you get to your destination, once you finally reach the peak or the summit, the top of the mountain, everything you've gone through up until that point is worthwhile. It makes all the sense in the world. Because what you behold when you're on top of a mountain isn't something most people experience very often or ever. The endless sky and the miles and miles of God's creation at its best all around you, 360 degrees. You see God's beauty from a different perspective. It's almost too much to take in. It's too much to capture in words or with a camera. It makes you feel small, but at the same time, it makes you feel like you're part of something so grand. And you want to stay there for a while, just to soak it all up. And except for the wind whipping around you, it's strangely quiet. No sounds of cars or construction workers or sirens or TVs or cell phones. And if you choose to really look and not be distracted by your own pain and filth at the top, the image that stays with you at the top of the mountain is the breadth, the wideness, the expansiveness, the extensiveness that is there to simply behold. The unwrapping of wonder happens in a very unique way at the top of a mountain. Of all the things we want in life, I believe what we want most is meaning. And when you're on top of a mountain, that's a good place to rediscover some meaning. Now, above the portal of the ancient cathedral in Lisbon, Portugal, is a marvelous portrayal of Mary, the mother of Jesus, with her child. And as is not typical of most images of Mary and her child, she's not bent over Jesus, the child, but instead she's looking far, far away into the distance, as if she were contemplating the deepest meaning of the incarnation of Christmas, as if she were on top of a mountain, beholding the breadth, the expansiveness, surveying the immeasurable consequences of the event that took place in Bethlehem. And what is that deepest meaning of that event? Well, friends, we are again here on the first Sunday of Advent, and we are plunged into that question. What is the deepest meaning of that event? The prophet Isaiah urges us to climb on up the mountain, to wait up there, to see things from a different perspective. He invites us to climb on up, to linger there, to take a deep breath, and to take a look around at the breadth of God's beauty and to soak it all up, to dwell in that deepest meaning of God's coming into our midst, and to let the wonder of Advent be unwrapped all around us. Forget for a moment how tired or dirty or in pain you are. Forget for a moment how small or insignificant you may think you are, because the view from the top of the mountain not only will give you a bigger picture of God, but it will give you a better picture of yourself. For a long time, the stubborn part of me, which is a large part, had a slight resistance to the prophets in the Bible because they are party crashers. They are buzzkills. You could be going about your own business and a prophet comes along and changes the mood, telling you something different, steering you in another direction, diverting your attention. It's never a pleasant thing, is it, to have someone tell you what you're doing wrong or not doing, what you're missing or what's going to happen if you don't get your act together? And I imagine the prophets weren't always well liked for this very reason, because they speak of both judgment and salvation, and it's really hard to know how to live in that tension. But God sent prophets like Isaiah to awaken people to God, and also to awaken them to the deepest meaning of who God is and what God is doing and what God will do. People were often doing things too much on their own when God had bigger and better things in mind. And I think part of my resistance to the prophets has to do with being similar to the people of Israel, that I too easily miss the underlying tone of promise that the prophets are speaking of. It's easy to get stuck on the tone of reprimand and wrath and judgment, and what we miss is the promise of salvation, that certainty of God breaking in and giving us more than enough reason for trust, for joy, for hope. And we see those things in new ways at the top of the mountain. Isaiah presents this grand image of God's mountain, of how God's mountain will be the highest of all the mountains, that the God of Israel is the God who is sending the party crasher prophets to let people know that there is a better party going on. Isaiah describes a party where Israel and all the people, all the nations, will learn of God's ways and really, finally participate in God's wider justice. Enough with the negative divisions between people. Enough of the oppression endured. Enough of the wars being fought, he says. Enough of the self-focus and internal conflict. Enough of all that, because it doesn't fit in any way within God's ultimate plan. It's not part of the deepest meaning God has in store for us. Instead, Isaiah says, come on, let's climb on up that mountain. You can see things better from up there. On top of a mountain is a good place to rediscover meaning. So after a long weekend filled with too much food, too much football, too much shopping, and maybe for some too much family, it's suddenly Advent. And yet all around us is Christmas. The preparations, the parties, the music, the decorations. And it's easy to bypass the mountain that is Advent, to skip over the strain of the climb up to the top and go straight to Christmas. Because every year around this time, we hear all the nonsensical war on Christmas talk, whether it relates to the red Starbucks cups or the term happy holidays or nativity scenes on the courthouse lawns. But it's actually not a war on Christmas at all, in my opinion. It's a war on Advent. With all our consuming and racing around and frenzied activity, we can often let our hearts go unprepared. We can often refuse to slow down. Of all the things we want, again, what we want most in life is meaning. And sometimes you just need to climb on up that mountain. Look around, wait, and rediscover that deepest meaning. Maybe you've heard me share before how Himalayan Sherpas are workers whose main job is to encourage and push and pace mountain climbers up to the summits of places like Mount Everest. But every once in a while, much to the chagrin of Westerners like us, they will stop and tell the climbers they are pushing that in their tradition, they stop for a while to rest long enough to allow their souls to catch up to their bodies. Advent is that moment to stop, rest, and let your soul catch up to your body. Advent slows us down. It makes us think and reflect. It makes us see with a fresh pair of eyes. We are reminded that Christ has come, and we wait all over again in this season because our lives depend on the truth that Christ is coming again. Advent is that moment that awakens us to what the prophets are saying, that unto us a child is born and is being born again. And his name is Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, King of Kings, Emmanuel, God with us. Advent is all about urging us to climb up the mountain and not be so quick to go back down, to stay right there, wait right there, and keep our eyes on what comes from God and to make way for it to be a reality in our ordinary lives. In other words, while we are waiting and watching, as Isaiah says, let us learn to walk in the light of the Lord together. So friends, climb on up and wait. Waiting isn't new. It's never been easy. But this year, wait. Choose to wait, friends. Choose to anticipate. Choose to prepare. Choose to make room. Choose to listen. Choose to put off the celebration a little longer. Make time to worship. Find ways to serve others. Make time for family and friends. Take care of yourself. The calendar season of Advent will go away, but the truth of it will not go away. God's coming into our midst is not just something that happened a long time ago. It is a recurring possibility here and now. No matter what's happening in the world, no matter what's happening to us, we will always stay in God's story. And God's story is seen in new ways at the top of the mountain. That is the season of Advent. So climb on up. Climbing mountains isn't easy, but the unwrapping of wonder that occurs at the top of a mountain in a very unique way is a great place to rediscover meaning. Climb on up and share in the longing of the prophets who awaited the Messiah with this aching intensity for thousands of years before he was born. Climb on up and wait for God to arrive again in our lives. While God has never left us, God knows the world still aches for the rebirth of Christ into our very midst. Climb on up and let us adore Christ again with fresh eyes and renewed hearts. Friends, climb on up the mountain. Climb on up that we may learn to walk together in the light of the Lord.